Today we will be covering the South Realm. Necropolis. There once was a king whose pride and self-regard knew no bounds. Reality could never hope to live up to the scale of his ambition. His forces made constant incursion into other kingdoms as he strived to extend the boundaries of his modest realm. With attention focused on expansion, the king neglected domestic affairs, and his subjects grew weary of constant conflict with others. Rebellion broke out when they could take no more. At that time, the king's forces were on yet another expedition. The army had never been a formidable fighting force and was no match for the rebels, and as such was quickly defeated. And so all the ambition of the king came to naught. A new dawn broke. The man who had led the rebellion against the vainglorious king came to power. The kingdom barely recovered from its period of turbulence, had new challenges looming on the horizon. Alarming reports reached the new king that a neighboring region was planning to take advantage of the disarray in his realm and invade. After all, it had been through. The kingdom was on its knees. There was no way it would be able to muster the forces to resist an invading army. The kingdom had a severe shortage of both men and weaponry. After all the years of fighting futile wars and the bloody rebellion that had come thereafter, the only thing the kingdom had a surplus of was dead bodies. The new king was at a total loss. How could he keep his kingdom safe from the threats it faced? The new king had been proud to ascend to the throne. Born into a poor family, he had never been involved in politics. Indeed, he had made it to the top purely as a result of his own strength and determination. But now, unable to come up with a plan, he sensed the dissatisfaction growing amongst his subjects. They feared him to be yet another ineffectual ruler. History was repeating itself. The new king had once mocked the old ruler, but now he was booed and jeered. The new king was learning fast. He now knew the true weight of the crown and how lonely the head that wears it. He thought about the solitude the old king must have known. How ironic that it was only by overthrowing the old king and taking his place that he could truly understand him. The crown had become an albatross around the king's neck. As the dissatisfaction from amongst his subjects grew, the pressure pushed him to the verge. Just when he feared he could take no more, he heard the strange voice and saw a peculiar chalice floating before him. The king did as the voice told him. He left the castle and headed out onto the streets. His destination was a huge mound of corpses, all those who had lost their life in the recent uprising. Among the bodies, he saw many who had once fought alongside him. The new king took the bodies of each of his fallen comrades and buried them. He made graves for all of them, but these were not normal graves. Wherever he buried the bodies, sharp blades spouted from the ground. The king had gained the power to forge weapons from the bodies of the dead. He tended to these weapons as someone might tend to their garden. Now the weapons that his kingdom had lacked were valuable in abundance, and all were more powerful than 100 conventional weapons. The king's forces swept all before them. The kingdom's territory expanded rapidly until it covered the map. It flourished and grew prosperous. The overwhelming military prowess of the kingdom meant that no neighboring force dared to attack, but still the new king did not stop. He continued to harvest new weapons. Eventually, he ran out of the dead bodies from which the weapons sprang. The king decided to replenish his supply of corpses by having all the criminals in his land summarily executed. Even the most trifling crime was now punishable by death. His advisors, horrified by what they were seeing, warned the king about his rashness, but he would not heed their word. The king thought to himself. When the kingdom had been in peril, everyone had blamed him. No one knows how much he suffered and how lonely he had been. His advisors' prattle showed they did not understand him. He would pay their judgment no heed. All the solitary king had to believe in was himself and his own authority. As time went on, the king grew steadily more despotic. He was unaware of what was happening to him. The old king whose reign he had brought to a bloody end had known the same solitude and had closed himself off from the world. This was what had led him to his fruitless pursuit of glory. Now, just as the old king had, the new ruler neglected his own realm as he sought to subjugate others. When a ruler no longer trusts his subjects, it's inevitable that he will seek to bolster his own authority by inspiring fear in all around him. Once a monarch embarks on this quest, he cannot be stopped. Through all this, the king continued to bury dead bodies in order to cultivate weapons, but now he had made a discovery. He realized that when he buried strangers, the weapons that sprang forth were less powerful than when he buried people he had been close to. The closer the bond they shared, the more powerful the weapon. This led the king to falsely accuse his closest advisors of heinous crimes for which he had them executed. The weapons that sprang forth from their bodies were more powerful than any the king had created before. And so it came to pass that one day the king found that he was alone. He had an abundance of weapons, but no one left who was willing to wield them. His subjects had all risen up against him. The king now faced the same fate as his predecessor. The rebel forces encircled him alone in his castle. Knowing that the end was at hand, the king decided to end his own life, but not before he wrote a final request. He asked that his body be buried in the earth. Some years passed, the kingdom had long since vanished. When the king had been laid to rest, blades had burst forth from the soil with terrifying force. The blades had spread relentlessly like giant vines that came to cover the kingdom. But they did not stop at the kingdom border. They broke the boundaries of surrounding lands. It was as if the king's futile campaign of expansion and subjugation was being continued after his death. Though his body was gone, the desire to conquer lived on. There were, of course, no subjects left to rule, but for the king who had never trusted people, perhaps this was a fitting end. Elven Vale. This was covered in the Archfiend Elven Queen. Luna Wace. There was once a man who lived in a constant state of wonderment. The merest glimpse at the night sky would fill him with fascination. As a young child, he had seen a shooting star, and his heart nearly burst with excitement. After that, he devoted his life to sky gazing, staring at the stars for hours as they lay in his bed. The habit continued into adulthood. Others would make fun of him for it, but he never lost his childlike wonder. So magnificent was the shooting star he saw that night that nothing else really seemed to matter. One evening, the man was looking at the sky as usual when a stranger approached. He was a traveler who claimed to be on a lengthy journey of discovery. "I've seen everything this world has to offer," the traveler boasted. "I've even been to the moon and back." The stargazer looked down from the sky and turned to the man with innocent wonder. "See this stone?" the traveler went on. "I brought this back with me from the moon. It's very precious to me, but I can see that you really want it. Perhaps we can come to an agreement?" The stargazer bought the stone for a small fortune. He had used all his savings, but was intensely happy. A few days later, one of the stargazer's acquaintances came to visit him. He said that the traveler had been a famous con artist, one who had tricked countless victims in the past. It turned out that the man had spent all his money on an ordinary rock. He was absolutely incensed. It wasn't about the money, it was because his love of the night sky was something pure, and he would not forgive the traveler for taking advantage of it. It was tantamount to mockery of the magnificent scene he'd once beheld. The view of the shooting star had been his solace as a child. Whatever strife or trouble he endured, the beauty of that scene would give him succor. He had idolized that shooting star, turning it into a kind of god, and his feeling towards it were almost worshipful. He absolutely could not tolerate its absentment. Abasement. The man tracked down the trickster and demanded his money back. After a lengthy quarrel, however, all he received was a knife in the stomach. Though his consciousness was fading, the man could still make out the stars in the night sky. As he gazed at them, he experienced two separate sensations. The first was a simple desire to continue looking at the heavens. The second was an intense hatred towards the man who had tricked and stabbed him. At that very moment, a curious light appeared. A white chalice floated before the stargazer and began to speak. He readily agreed to the chalice's proposal. A column of white light rose around the man. As though supported by the light, he began to float into the sky. He continued rising further and further into space until his body became another star in his beloved night sky. Half of the man's desires had been satisfied, but this came at a price. He could never be human again. In his new guise, he descended to Earth, heading for the man who had tricked him. He had become something even more beautiful and even brighter than the shooting star he so fondly remembered. But was he aware of this? The falling star became an arrow, a manifestation of the man's desire for revenge. It was as if he had become an avatar of divine rage. The arrow-shaped star caused an enormous explosion as it crashed into the ground, changing the surrounding area beyond all recognition, a sign of how much the stargazer hated his aggressor. It is said that the light of the explosion glowed even in distant lands. The con artist was obliterated without a trace. Indeed, the whole area had turned into a wasteland. There is now not a single tree in sight. Day never breaks in this place, perhaps as a result of the stargazer's passion of the night sky. The only source of light is the arrow that fell from the sky, standing there, still burning as brightly as ever. There were many in distant land who witnessed the explosion, and among them there are some who were enthralled by the sight, just like the man who worshipped the shooting star. Though the man may now be gone, the object of his worship still remains, changed slightly but now venerated by a new generation. And sure enough, though its numbers may yet be small, its ranks grow slowly but surely. That is, the ranks of a peculiar cult which takes the light of the star for its sacred haven. Poseidon Inn. There was once a man on the verge of throwing himself off a cliff into the ocean. His business has gone badly and he was drowning in debt. In the place he went to end it all, a giant monster was said to dwell, and so no one frequented the place. The man prepared for the end. Suddenly, a jet of water shot up from the ocean and a dark mass surfaced. The monster had appeared. When he looked closer, the man realized it was not a monster after all, but a giant whale. At some point, people must have seen this whale and mistaken it for a monster, and so the rumors spread. The man who had been ready to end his life now stood transfixed by the majesty of the sight before him. What he felt was not fear. He felt profoundly moved by the beauty of what he was witnessing. Perhaps he was the only person alive who had ever seen this extraordinary sight. People had believed those ridiculous rumors and avoided this place, but they had missed out. The man's instincts as a merchant began to stir. There's money in this, he thought. For lack of money, he himself created a long bench and placed it at the edge of the cliff overlooking the ocean. He headed to the nearest city and began touting for business, saying that he could show them a sight that would change their lives. He told them where they could see the whale and asked for a small fee in exchange. Many were too afraid to go near the place teeming with so many stories, but for others, curiosity got the better of them. They paid the man and went to see for themselves. All who witnessed the sight were mesmerized. Word soon spread, and the people flocked to the spot the man had discovered. He used the money he made to build a small hut on the cliff's edge. He now had an inn. With somewhere to stay, people came from far and wide. The man was now raking in the money. He was able to pay off his debts in no time. His success had taught him something. This place had once been feared and none dared approach, and so it had remained unknown and unspoiled. He could see that for some, the whale could indeed appear a terrifying monster, yet he had managed to sell it as a sight of stunning natural beauty, so that people began to view it with wonder. He had been able to turn something negative into a positive. The man decided he had hit upon a winning formula for making money. As his wealth and success grew, so too did the inn, even grander, until it resembled nothing less than an imposing castle. The man had reached his peak. He was riding the crest of a wave. His success has been rapid, but so too was his decline. The man thought he had grasped the secret of success, yet there was more for him to learn. He would soon be taught how harsh the market can be. People began to tire of the whale. Those who came to see the sight would leave satisfied, but they did not tend to return. The number of visitors dwindled over time, and the man's inn fell into disrepair. He tried various other money-making schemes, but nothing came of them. Another harsh lesson. Sometimes nothing can be done to save a business in decline. To make matters worse, the man was used to a life of luxury, buying only the best and eating and drinking extravagantly. Though his profits plummeted, he continued to live in the style to which he was accustomed, and he was loath to let it go. The man continued to live the high life even as his debts mounted, and this led him back to where he started. Drowning in debt, the man decided to throw himself into the ocean. The whale surfaced just as it had before, but this time there were not to be any revelations. This time he was really going to go through with it. As he plunged into the water, the man saw an extraordinary sight. He saw coral reefs and shoals of brightly covered fish swimming amongst them. He felt profoundly moved, just as he had been when he first saw the whale. He was witnessing something no one else had seen. If he could just build an inn down here beneath the waves, As the drowning man thought this, he saw a curious sight, a chalice that seemed to be speaking to him. It told him to pay the price. If he did so, his wish would be granted. The man obeyed. The sea parted, leaving a strip of exposed seabed between two walls of water. Now people could stand on the seabed and witness the extraordinary sight of the coral with shoals of fish swimming around it. There was even an inn within the body of a giant whale. The whale was still alive, its mouth ever open to allow people to enter. The interior of the whale was stunning, adorned with beautiful coral ornaments. Everything was in place for the guests who would come to feast on the ocean riches. The man had succeeded in getting his business up and running once more, but there was something missing. The man was nowhere to be seen. While making the sea part, the man had been forced to swallow vast quantities of seawater. His bloated form now floated far beyond the horizon where none could see him. This was the price the man had paid. As he bobbed on the surface of the water, the man had plenty of time to reflect on all he had learned. Yet another valuable lesson in the world of business. If you want something, you always have to pay the price. The Gingerbread Village. This is a story already told by the Archfiend Hansel and Gretel. Thank you for listening.